The Death God's Daily Troubles by MagicalDucky. Chapter 18. The Greatest Teachers Learn from Their Students. Royal Academy, Room 207. Kyle's Point of View. I looked out the hallway windows to my side to see a beautiful sunny day outside, and a light yawn inadvertently left my mouth as I slowly made my way over to the classroom. I was a little light on sleep today since I stayed up late last night trying to make sure Aria was okay. But I don't think I helped much. Ever since we finished hanging out with Elaine and Lillian yesterday, she's been a little fried in the head. See, she was barely able to talk last night. I got flustered every time I tried to talk or even enter the room. It seemed like she was on edge the whole night, too. But I think it might have been my fault. I bought a small hair clip for her yesterday when we were shopping with Elaine and Lillian in the accessory shop, because it was the first time I'd ever seen her do anything even close to hanging out with friends. And I knew in order to make it any progress in curing her social anxiety, I would need to make sure yesterday had a lasting impression on her. From what I saw while we were hanging out yesterday, I was pretty sure that she was having at least a bit of fun, so I thought that buying her a small gift as a reminder of the fun that she had had yesterday would be a good strategy to trick her brain into associating fun with hanging out yesterday and consequently Elaine and Lillian too. I was racking my head when we went shopping yesterday thinking about what I could buy, since it had to be something she would use often enough to actually be an effective reminder. It couldn't be too much of a burden on my wallet either, since we were already a bit strapped on cash. And most importantly, it couldn't be too suspicious. It had to be something I could reasonably give her as a present. Eventually, I figured that a cheap accessory or something like that would be perfect, and I managed to secretly convince Lillian to inconspicuously bring us into an accessory shop while we were shopping. After that, Lillian kept Aria busy while I looked around the store and found a nice, simple-looking hair clip that wasn't too pricey. I bought it, and I gave it to her after Lillian signaled to me that she was alone. And we all went home a little after that. Aria nearly gave me a heart attack, too, when we were walking home and she randomly asked me why I bought her the hair clip. I just came up with some random excuse while putting my best smile on, and I thought she was on to me for a second, but it looked like she bought it. Anyway, I feel a little guilty now that because, well, when I silently peeked into her room last night to check to see if she was okay, she was just sitting in her bed, completely silent and hugging her knees while staring blankly at the hair clip I bought her as her face was burning up. I bought her the hair clip as a small keepsake, but it looked like I underestimated exactly how crippling her social anxiety was, because instead of reminding her about how much fun we had had with Elaine and Lillian yesterday, it was just triggering a prolonged anxiety attack or something like that. And this morning, it was even worse. I woke up to make breakfast, and she was just sitting in the living room wearing the hair clip while looking like a disheveled mess, with bloodshot eyes and bags under her eyes like she barely got any sleep yesterday. She ate breakfast as fast as she could, and she tried to make a break for it, telling me that she was leaving for work, but I stopped her before she went outside. After double-checking to see if she was okay, it seemed like she got over some of the anxiety by herself last night, at least enough to talk to me a bit again. But I wasn't about to let her walk out of the house looking like a ghoul, so I cleaned her up a bit and fixed her hair. She curled up again and refused to make eye contact with me while I was cleaning her up, but when I tried to take away the hair clip, she immediately resisted. So I just left it on. Anyway, she seems normal enough afterwards to go to work, and I was done. So I just handed her her lunchbox and sent her on her way. So now, thanks to my great idea, I've probably made it harder for Aria to open up, and I'm late to class too because of the time I wasted cleaning her up earlier. Since, of course, everything nice I do has to eventually end up screwing me over in some way, doesn't it? Well, whatever. I guess I'll just have to burn that bridge when I get to it. I let out a sigh as I stopped in front of the door to room 207 and opened it before stepping into the room. The sight of everyone talking to each other in their seats met my eyes as I walked in, and they all turned to stare at me while I walked over to my desk and pulled out the chair and took a seat. Hey, everyone. I put my satchel down and leaned over the top of my table while stretching my arms out with a blissful sigh as Mari yelled at me. "You're late, Kai. Class was supposed to start 15 minutes ago. Yeah, I'm sorry. I had something I had to do. I got up and rummaged around my bag and to look for alchemy materials as I pulled out the first few stones I could find. A few ice elemental monster cores. I threw them on the table and rubbed my eyes before calling out to the class. Anyway, I guess we can just go over some more ice elemental circles today or something. We already did a couple basic ones last week, right? So I guess we can do some more advanced ones today. Any questions? I got up off the table and looked around the room as I saw Sophie swiftly raise her hand to call out with a curious glint in her eye. Professor Kai, is there a difference between the magic circles we studied last week and the more advanced ones we're about to study today? Well, they'll have a little more lines in them. Was that it? Is there a change in mana density or flow of the magical circle? Seriously, Sophie, why do you even ask at this point? Do you really think Kai knows the answer to any of those questions? Replied Zane. Hey, come on. Don't say that. Professor Kai might be a little bit... Okay, he's unreliable when it comes to his knowledge of specifics, but at least the magic circles always work if we draw them the way he does. Hey, maybe he knows something about what Sophie's asking this time, replied Halbert. Halbert looked over at me with an expectant smile, but unfortunately his trust was misplaced as I averted my eyes from his binding aura of kindness and turned to Sophie with tears in my eyes from letting Halbert down. Sorry, but I have no idea. See, I told you. Okay, I got it. I guess I'll just have to analyze these myself later, too. Zane sighed and shook his head as Halbert gave a dry laugh with a slightly disappointed face, while Sophie wrote something down in her notebook with a passionate smile on her face. You know what? How about we just start class? I walked up to the board and picked a random ice magic circle that was around a second-level spell before picking up a piece of chalk. A complicated magic circle took its form in a few seconds as the chalk in my hand flew around the board and I grabbed a monster core before going to the corner of the room to get the large bucket that I'd been using to catch all the ice bits after I learned my lesson last time. Back when I was running around fighting all the time, I never really thought about anything that happened after I used a magic circle except whether or not it hurt the enemy. But the last time we studied an ice element magic circle in class, I got ice bits everywhere and had to clean it all off the floor afterwards. So my genius solution was to just use a bucket to catch all the side product from the magic circles and toss it out after class. I put the bucket down and the magic circle on the board and held out the monster core up to the circle to activate it. Frozen snare. Single cast. Active. An icy blue light shone from the magic circle on the board as soon as my words left my mouth, and a chunk of ice encased my hand after the magic circle activated. After a moment, I shook my hand and broke free of a few chunks of ice that fell into the bucket with a loud clunk. All right, there you go. This magic circle is more or less around a level of a second-level circle ice spell. And it's meant to be used as a trap, because once it's activated, it'll try to encase anything touching it in a layer of ice. So ideally, you could set it up on the ground and set it off when an enemy steps on it, or even draw it on the palm of a glove with a few channels to connect it to a monster core and activate it when you grab something to freeze whatever you're grabbing. Well, that is, as long as you don't mind getting your hands a little cold like I did. I placed the monster core back onto the table and rubbed my hands together while breathing into them to warm them up a bit as everyone looked over with curious expressions on their faces. The sound of pens scratching against paper resounded through the room, and I moved the half bucket of ice chunks back over to the corner of the room before taking a seat at my table. Sophie was the first one to run up to the board to inspect the magic circles as I deflated backwards into my chair. I pushed the monster cores up on the table towards her and her direction before flopping down on top of the table with a yawn while watching everyone else slowly walk up to the board. All right, here's some monster cores if you guys want to experiment. Just be careful what you freeze. and make sure you catch all the ice in the bucket. As for me, well, I'm a little tired today, so I'm going to be just taking a little nap. Do me a favor. Wake me up when it's time for lunch, will you? I closed my eyes as everyone turned to me with an awkward expression. And I was beginning to drift off into sleep when a light impact on my side and Mari's yelling voice brought me back to my senses. I opened my eyes to see Mari standing in front of me with an angry face as she held her fist up, while Rena stood behind her with an awkward smile on her face. I don't care how tired you are, Kai. You're the professor. You do your job. What am I even paying you for if you're just going to come here and sleep? Oh, well, they can just wake me up if they need anything, and it's not like I do much after I give them the circle to study anyway. Usually it's just them copying down the magic circle and then experimenting with it by themselves while I just sit and read a book or something in the corner. So, cut me a break this time. I'll only be sleeping until lunch, so I'll be awake for the rest of class. It'll be fine. I waved my hand at Mari as she stood there like she wanted to say something back, but she just shut her mouth after a moment and let out a sigh and then shook her head in disappointment while Rena tried to comfort her. What's wrong, Mari? Nothing. I'm just realizing how little you're actually doing as a professor. Well, Professor Kai already wrote us the magic circle on the board for us to study, and he seems like he's really tired today, so how about we just let him rest for a bit, huh, Aunt Mari? Replied Rena. Mari stared at Rena for a moment, who was smiling at her before staring at me a bit and letting out another sigh. All right, fine. You can take a small nap until lunch, but just this one time, all right? You're lucky that Rena's nice enough to plead for a lazy professor like you. Mari turned around and walked back to her seat with a disappointed look on her face as I turned to Rena with a grin before extending my hand out and gently patting her head. Thanks, Rena. I closed my eyes as I heard Rena let out a soft whimper and mumbles of some incoherent gibberish, but I ignored it as the sound of everyone chatting softly in the background slowly lulled me off to sleep. Some light shaking woke me up as I heard the sound of Sophie calling out my name. Professor Kai, wake up, it's lunchtime. I got up and let out a yawn before groggily rubbing my eyes open to see Sophie standing in front of me. All right, I'm up. Thanks, Sophie. No problem. Sophie turned around and walked over to Mari and Rena to have lunch as the sound of the door opening caught my attention. I looked over and saw Halbert, Rengus, and Zane walk into the room holding their lunch from the school cafeteria before Zane called out to me. Kai, you're finally up. Come on, let's have some lunch. Sure. I stretched out a bit before reaching over to my satchel to pull out my lunchbox as Halbert, Rengus, and Zane sat down in their seats and waited for me. A few moments passed by as I pulled my chair over and sat down in front of them while they all opened their wrapped sandwiches and started eating. After taking a seat, I placed my lunchbox down under the table and opened it up as Zane took a bite out of his sandwich before taking a swig of his juice. Blech! Man, these sandwiches really are tasteless, stated Zane. Yeah, it's not the greatest, but hey, at least it's cheap, replied Halbert. Man up and eat it. It's not tasty, but it's enough to fill your stomachs, isn't it? Interjected Rengus. Well, if the school lunch is so bad, why don't you just bring in your own? Well, we live in the school dorm, so none of us have the luxury to have someone make us a lunch every day like you, Kai, replied Zane. Zane peered over at my lunch with an envious look on his face before taking another bite of his sandwich with tears in his eyes. If you don't have anyone to make your lunch, just make it yourself like I do. Wait, you make these yourself? Yeah, every day in the morning before I come to class. Who do you think made these? No, I always thought someone else just made these for you, Professor Guile. Well, there is someone else that I live with, but when it comes to cooking, let's just say that terrible wouldn't even begin to describe it. Anyway, like I said, you can just make your lunches yourselves if the school ones are so bad. I'm not saying you need to cook, but I'm sure you can at least be capable of putting together a sandwich or two. I never thought about that. Well, I could probably make a decent sandwich. But I'll be honest, I don't really want to. It seems like a drag to go buy all that ingredients, and I'd rather just sleep during the mornings instead of waking up early and stomach this stuff later. At the very least, it's edible, replied Zane. I'd make lunch for everyone in the mornings if I could, but my schedule's pretty packed usually, and I'm busy most mornings, so I can't really take out time to make us lunch, said Halbert. Halbert gave me a sheepish smile and helplessly scratched his head while Zane finished his sandwich with an unenthusiastic face. I thought for sure Halbert would say something along the lines of, "Don't worry, guys, I'll make everyone's lunch from now on, because that's what friends do," since he's the designated nice guy who seems like he would go out of his way for anyone even remotely acquainted with him. But I guess he has other things to do, too. Well, if he's not the one making lunch, I guess it's Rengus that is left out of the trio, but I highly doubt he's going to do it, considering his whole bootleg Goku and Vegeta dynamic with Halbert. I started taking a sip of water as I looked over at Rengus to see him crossing his arms with his eyes closed like he was thinking about something. And a moment passed before he cleared his throat and turned to Zane and Halbert. Well, since Halbert's so useless he can't even take 10 minutes out of his day to make a sandwich, I guess I'll just have to pick up the slack and make lunch for us all. Wait, what? I immediately coughed up a bit of water, and as Rengus looked away from us with an embarrassed frown while Zane thanked him with a carefree grin, and Halbert turned to him with an apologetic one. Cool. Thanks, Rengus. Sorry, Rengus. I guess we'll have to rely on you yet again. Thanks. Huh? What's wrong, Kai? The trio looked over at me in confusion, and I gestured to them to stop before turning to Halbert and Rengus. Wait, hold up. I thought you two had this whole rivalry thing going on. What happened to, I'm only going to be here for one reason, to get stronger, strong enough to surpass a certain man when you introduce yourself? Zane started laughing at my impression of Rengus, and Halbert let out a light chuckle as Rengus had an embarrassed look on his face. Let me tell you a secret, Kai. Rengus may look like he's a jerk on the surface, but ever since we've been kids, he's always been helping us out. He's really a nice guy who always looks out for everyone. He's just too shy to show it. Shut up. It's not like I'm specifically looking out for you two. I'm just trying to make my lunches better. And making lunch for you two is just something extra to make sure that you're both on the same level as me. Since beating you two wouldn't count as much if I had a huge advantage like better nutrition. Yeah, it's okay. You just don't need to tell us the truth, Rengus. We already know, so thanks, buddy. Oh, I see. Thought I had him all figured out as the cardboard cutout rival with an inferiority complex. But it looks like he's really just an edgy tsundere. Well, I guess the act was enough to fool me at first, so he got me there at least. Rengus looked away from Halbert and Zane with an embarrassed blush on his face and crossed his arms again as he turned towards him with an understanding smile. See, I never thought you'd be such a tsundere, Rengus. I let out a light-hearted laugh and reorganized the trio's relationship dynamic in my head as they all turned to me with confused looks on their faces again. What's a tsundere? Oh, sorry. I guess it's a little hometown dialect slipped out there. You see, back where I'm from, a tsundere is someone who always acts like they don't care about you, even though they really do on the inside. And they usually say things along the lines of, I had nothing better to do, or I just made it because it was an extra, when they really did it for your sake. But they were just too shy to say it outright. Zane started laughing hysterically after I told him what a tsundere is, and he pointed to Rengus as he could barely stop laughing. I never heard someone so accurately describe Rengus. I guess he really is just a big tsundere. Yeah, the description's pretty uncanny. Well, I guess I learned something new today. I'm not a tsundere, whatever. My goal is to surpass Halbert fair and square, and it won't count if he's disadvantaged, all right? A few more minutes passed as we teased Rengus a bit before we finally finished lunch, and it was about time to start class again. I put away my now empty lunchbox and walked back to the front of the room as I gathered everyone's attention. All right, I guess we should just start class again. So, what did you guys learn about the magic circle? I looked around the room and saw Sophie's hand shoot up instantly with a passionate look in her eyes. I let out a sigh and got out of my seat as I pulled out the notebook and pen from my satchel and brought my chair with me to the corner of the room. All right, just come up here and tell us what you've got, Sophie. Sophie immediately got up and sprinted to the front of the classroom with her notebook in hands before stopping in front of the magic circle on the board and beginning her lecture. Well, after analyzing it a bit, I've learned that this magic circle in particular, Frozen Snare, has a more complex design like you mentioned before, but as such, it also requires a higher quantity of mana and therefore higher mana density to function, especially in these areas indicated in the diagram I've drawn. I scribbled down some quick notes on Sophie's explanation of the magic circle in my notebook, while Sophie opened her notebook to reveal a small copy of the magic circle on the board with a few circles and arrows pointing to certain parts. She showed it off to the rest of the class with a beaming smile on her face and pointed to the important parts of it while giving her explanations. You see, the circle parts have about double the mana density of the previous ice element magic circle we studied last week, Ice Shard, while the parts with the arrow pointing to them have about the same level of mana density. However, while the differences in the mana density might lead you to believe that the mana flow might fluctuate in some areas, it's actually very smooth, and the flow is unimpeded in most parts of the circle. The only problem area I could find is a small point at one of these super high density areas in the middle where the mana tends to build up. But I believe that's where the mana from the monster core is converted into actual ice, so it would make sense for it to have a higher mana density. That's all I have in the design of the magic circle so far, but I do have some theories about the different functions of the sub-design in the circles. Sophie turned towards me with an expectant look in her eyes while she was waiting for me to give her some praise before she started talking about her theories, and I finished writing down what she said in my research notebook for my lesson plans next year before giving her a smile. All right, good job, Sophie. That's some nice analysis of the magic circle there. Anybody have any questions? I looked around the room to see Halbert and Rangus writing down things in their notebooks, while Zane was just fumbling around with his pen, and Rena had an awkward smile on her face as she was consoling Mari, who was face-palming as she shook her head. It seems like there aren't any questions from the class, so would you please elaborate on what your theories are, Sophie? Also, send me a copy of the diagram later if you can. I'll grade it for you. All right, I was saying for the first sub-design, the top left magic circle, my theory is that the functions and the indicator for what form the ice takes. You see, when we compare it to the previous magic circle, Ice Shard, you can see that many of the sub-designs are similar to the same. But this one, on the top left, with a few sub-degrees, has changed. I'm not completely sure this hypothesis is correct. However, if I had another ice elemental magic circle around the same level, I could cross-reference them and maybe even figure out some of the other ones too. Professor Kyle? Sure. Give me a second. I'll draw you another one. Sophie turned to me again with another expectant look on her face as I stopped writing in my notebook, as I picked another random ice element circle. Which one should I draw? Well, I mean, she's right about that symbol, because when you change it, the ice will make different shapes. But if I tell her that outright, I'll probably have to actually teach the rest of the class something else. So I should probably just give her a magic circle to study that has to do with the shape of the ice. Oh, I got it. It's a little more complex than what we've been doing, but how about Frostblade? I'm sure that Sophie will figure it out by the end of the day, like she does with every other magic circle we study. Anyway, her talent and intuition for alchemy are leagues above mine, to the point where it's borderline scary. At this rate, I'll run out of things to teach her after a few months. Maybe we should just have some more practical training, so I don't have to constantly throw out magic circles at Sophie and watch her progress with them within a few hours. Rangus was asking about practical uses of magic circles last time anyway, so maybe some controlled combat might be in order. I guess we could go out of the city and practice on some monsters. I'm sure there's a few weak ones like slimes or something in the forest nearby. Actually, I can probably just drop by the guild and ask them about safe areas for beginner adventurers too, since the safe areas usually just have weak monsters. I walked over and picked up a monster core from my desk as Sophie took a seat before taking a piece of chalk off the chalkboard, drawing another magic circle right next to the frozen snare circle and activating it. Frostblade, single cast, active. An icy blue shone out of the chalkboard again, as moments later a monster core in my hands was completely used up and a longsword made of ice emerged from the magic circle. It felt cold to the touch as I held it in my hands, and I swung it around slowly a few times to test out the weight as a nostalgic yet frighteningly familiar feeling rushed into me through my hands gripping the sword. Man, how long has it been since I held a sword? I almost forgot how natural it felt to be gripping one. Looks like my days of fighting and killing might be over, but the memories stay there forever. Huh. Well, they can haunt me all they want, but I'm technically retired now, so I'm too lazy to go fight, and hopefully I'll never have to experience that feeling of cutting into another person again. But hey, if I need to, I can at least cut some inanimate objects, can't I? A feeling of melancholy flooded my senses as I stared blankly at the sword in my hands for a moment before I threw the piece of chalk I was holding into the air and swung the ice sword in my hands. My 1,000-year-old muscle memory kicked in, and I unconsciously used a good portion of my strength to slice the chalk cleanly into two pieces as the edge of the ice blade cut through the air, following the same utterly refined motions that I had used a real blade for countless times in the past. Strong wind blasted through the room from the pure air pressure of my swing as the blade of ice in my hands instantly shattered into bits after making contact with the chalk, and a burst of tiny ice crystals covered the floor. I came back to my senses after I heard the two pieces of chalk hit the ground, and I looked around to see the mess on the floor surrounding me as I held the now bladeless hilt of the ice sword. Ah, crap. I used too much strength, didn't I? Well, I guess I'm on cleanup duty then again. Maybe I should invest in a tarp, too. I let out a sigh and turned back to the class to see everyone staring in astonishment as I sheepishly smiled and scratched my head. So, that was Frostblade, and it makes, well, a blade of ice that, as you saw. It's around the level of a fourth circle ice magic, and it's a legitimate weapon, so it's a bit dangerous, but it seems I used a bit too much force when I tried to show off how sharp it can be, and accidentally broke the blade. Sorry about that. Anyway, I hope the magic circle helps you prove your theory, Sophie. I tried to pick one that was related to the shape of ice changing. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to have to go grab a broom to clean up this mess. You guys can start studying the magic circle while I'm gone. Just be careful not to hurt yourselves. I gave a dry laugh and dropped the sword hilt made of ice in my hands into the bucket before leaving the room to go get a broom as I took a deep breath and calmed down the urge to fight and kill that was beginning to bubble up again after such a long time.